Kwe, hello. Welcome to tonight's Our Stories Indigenous Book Club event. I'm Mari Brocape, and I work for Indigenous Theater at the National Arts Center. I'm an Algonquin Anishinaabe from Kitigan-Zibi First Nation, and I would like to recognize that I am here today on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, as are both the National Arts Center and the Ottawa Public Library, who have joined in partnership for this series. I would also like to honor the land that we live and work on and acknowledge the Algonquin ancestors, past, present, and future, for taking care of us and the land. And as always, I want to recognize all the territories and treaties from where all of you, our viewers and speakers, are joining from today, for those who are not joining us from Algonquin territory tonight. I hope you have a great time and enjoy the talk. Miigwech.
Thank you, Marie, for that beautiful introduction. Good evening, bonsoir à tous. My name is Harvey Slack, and I'm a proud trustee of the board of the Ottawa Public Library. It is a pleasure to welcome you on behalf of the Ottawa Public Library to the second session of Our Stories Indigenous Book Club. Each month, we are highlighting recently published works from Indigenous authors across Turtle Island. Ottawa Public Library is delighted to be partnering with the National Arts Center Indigenous Theatre on this. The library wishes to thank the Friends of the Ottawa Public Library Association for their support to this series. Support to the National Arts Center from the Slate Family Foundation and TD's The Ready Commitment is also much appreciated. Tonight, we are pleased to feature the collection Performing Turtle Island, Indigenous Theatre on the World Stage, edited by Jessie Ray Archibald Barber, Kathleen Irwin, and Moira J. Day. With authors of multidisciplinary and diverse perspectives, Performing Turtle Island considers performance as both a means to self-empowerment and self-determination, and a way of placing Indigenous performance in dialogue with other nations, both on the islands of Turtle Island and on the world stage. Each essay in Performing Turtle Island addresses issues that remind us all that the way to reconciliation between Canadians and Indigenous peoples is neither straightforward nor easily achieved. This evening, we have editor Jessie Ray Archibald Barber, Métis, Cree, Scottish, and German, is here to speak with playwright, director, and dramaturg Yvette Nolan, Algonquin, about Performing Turtle Island and how theater can be a tool for community engagement, education, and resistance. Jessie Ray Archibald Barber is an associate professor of Indigenous Literatures at First Nations University of Canada in Regina. He is the editor of Ki-Si-Scott-Chiwan, Indigenous Voices from Where the River Flows Swiftly, and the writer and producer of the Making Treaty for Performance project. Ottawa Public Library is delighted to bring you remarkable stories and peoples that can inspire and challenge us all to explore different perspectives. Coming up in March, our series of programs focused on cooking and technology, plus the next session of Our Stories with U-Ish equals Kelka Par. Head to the library website for more information on those events. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the evening. Bonne soirée, and now over to you, Yvette.
Miigwech Harvey, Ani, Kwe, Tansi, Bonjour, Yvette Ndijnakas, Kitigan-Zibi Nondanjaba. I so rarely get to say that on my own territory. My name is Yvette. As Harvey said, I am Algonquin First Nation from Kitigan-Zibi, just up the road from where you guys are. But I'm actually beaming into you from Treaty 6 territory in Saskatchewan, which is Cree territory, Saulteaux, Nakota, Dakota, Lakota, and homeland of the Métis. And it's funny that I'm going to invite Jessie to join me because Jessie is also in Saskatchewan, although I believe you're on Treaty 4, right, Jessie?
Yeah, Treaty 4, just south of Treaty 6 there.
There you go. But here we are beaming into Ottawa to the nation's capital to have a chat about books. Really nice to see you. I've known Jesse for a while. When I was the writer in residence at University of Regina, Jesse was doing my play, The Unplugging, with Indigenous theater students there. And now we are talking about your book. This is the book. Here's my notes on the side. Performing Turtle Island.
Oh, is it my my connection? I think we lost Yvette, the connection there. I can pick up, I can keep talking until Yvette's connection is back.
Can you see me?
Yeah, you're back.
Awesome. Weird, because like I'm plugged right into the wall.
Oh, I think we lost the connection again.
Oh. This is not, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to keep talking then, if you can hear me. And I'm going to turn off my camera. So now you're not going to see me at all. Can you still hear me, Jesse?
Yeah.
Awesome. Good. You're going to have to carry this.
Oh, we lost sound. Oh, the technology was working so good.
We all did a test off the top.
Yeah, we were all chatting for like a half hour before.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can hear me now.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw out a question and then you're going to talk and then.
Okay.
Conference. You guys fought really hard for this, right? You fought, it was a long road to get this published. So why is this book so important? Like both personally for you and professionally, sort of for the larger, both the theater community and the Indigenous theater community?
Yeah, it was a long journey for sure. It started with a collaboration between myself and Kathleen Irwin, who is was a professor at the U of R theater department, and a theater artist named Michelle Serreta. And we had this vision for bringing together, because we saw there was so much great Indigenous performance going on, and we wanted to create a venue or a place where we could have a gathering and invite artists from all across the country to discuss and explore where Indigenous theater was at, where it was going. And out of that, it was such a wonderful conference. It was over 3 days in the fall of 2015 that we wanted to gather, give an opportunity to the artists and scholars to share their ideas and insights into a collection. And then, yeah, that still took several years of gathering and editing and bringing it together. And then, of course, the publishing process, once something goes into press, then takes a while as well. So I believe it came out in, was it 2019? It finally came out, or 2018.
Yeah, 2019, I think.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So that was 4 years just there, and even a fifth, really, if you add on, because we started conceiving of it in 2014. Yeah, and there was, and so we got a really strong, amazing group of artists and writers to contribute. And there wasn't really much work out there on the subject as well. But then it all came together because I know that you were a part of another work, Performing Indigeneity. And so it was really wonderful that these things were, it was like it was time, right? It was like the time for Indigenous theater to really coalesce, and then a lot of material has started to come out on it now. So it's almost like riding a wave, right? Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know if we can't hear you, but if you're, I can continue. Some of the writers that were really exciting to include, there was Michael Greyeyes, who gave a keynote for the conference, and his talk was so amazing, and it was so entertaining and insightful that he was kind enough to let us publish the transcript of the keynote. And so that's what we start the book off with his exploration of the physicality of Indigenous performance, and also connected to revitalizing language. And Michael Greyeyes, of course, is an amazing actor and has gone on to appear in a lot of television shows and movies. And following that theme, the next chapter is by Armand Rufo, who is an incredible poet, an Anishinaabe poet and filmmaker. And his chapter and his talk at the Performing Turtle Island Conference was about his journey of making a film, an independent film, as an Indigenous artist. And the story reads like a comedy of errors, right? I really recommend reading that chapter, because you see it would be a good movie in and of itself about the making of a movie, because of all of the calamities and struggles, and the struggle for funding, and then even once you get funding, all of the things falling apart, and just he calls the title of his chapter is making a movie, or how to carry an elephant up a mountain, which really captures the essence of his journey. But there was, and so a lot of the chapters were really, and the writing and the discussions at the conference were really about that struggle that Indigenous artists face when trying to bring their vision to the stage, and as well as the importance of doing that. I mean, one of the most one of the chapters in the book that always stuck with me, and why I really encourage the writer, is the chapter by Megan Davies. And she was a grad student at the time, and she had written a paper and gave a presentation on a play called Changes that was staged in the Northwest Territories in 1991. And what amazed me about it was that this play, and the history that she follows with the production history of this play, you see how this community performance group in Northwest Territories, and that part of the Northwest Territories that became Nunavut, what the play itself was pivotal in raising awareness and influencing the political decisions to create Nunavut as its own territory. And that always fascinated me, because it really demonstrates how Indigenous theater really can influence political change, right? And we see that, and yeah, so that I felt like that chapter, I definitely wanted that in the book as well. Yeah. Hi, Yvette, you're back.
Hi, Jesse. I came back. I was out wandering in the stars for a bit, but apparently I'm back. So I don't want to ask a question that's already been asked, but I do want to talk a bit about a lot of the pieces inside the book feel like they're about learning how to learn, right? Like Michael's piece and Carol Grey-Eye's piece and Kahante Horn-Miller's piece, they're all really about learning how to learn. So how did that happen? Like, what do you think that says about Indigenous pedagogy, Indigenous learning, Indigenous worldview?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think because a lot of the writers, if not all of them, in addition to being artists, are also educators, right? And a lot of our art is done in that educational context, and that's something that really, I think, is at the heart of like what makes Indigenous performance distinct as Indigenous performance, right? And it's a really complicated question, especially, you know, if the performance is in English for one, right? And it's you're negotiating those Western conventions with Indigenous content, which is in English, right? So the Indigenous themes are often something that transcends or that goes beyond just the language or the conventions, right? And that takes a lot of discussion and education, and yeah, so that takes up a lot of the discourse.
It does. I was saying just before I got thrown out into the internet that I was at a Talking Stick festival in Vancouver about, I can't remember how many years ago, within the last decade, probably ish. And we talked, everyone in circle talked about what we wanted to see. This was all about performance, Indigenous performance. And one of the things that kept coming up was we need more critical work. We need more scholarship. We need more. And so it's heartening to me to see like this book come out. The book that I co-edited with Rick, Performing Indigeneity. But there's still like, is there enough? Is it happening? Where are the next ones coming from?
Yeah, that's a really good point. That same thought crossed my mind as well. It was like there was kind of a coalescing of all of this great energy, and there was Performing Indigeneity and then Performing Turtle Island. And yeah, where's the follow-up to that? It was like we had built a lot of momentum, and that's a good question. Where is that new energy coming from? And I think it's always still there in the community and in community productions. And like I know here we continued on the kind of parallel, and then after Performing Turtle Island, we continued on with the Making Treaty 4 project. And we wanted our performance group, who was originally connected to the Performing Turtle Island thing. And we wanted to continue that on. And then of course the COVID hit and things kind of kind of fell apart, so to speak. And I shouldn't say fall apart, because things are still going on in this way, in a virtual way, including performances. And it's really reshaped in a lot of ways, how we do performance. And so I don't want to, COVID's been a struggle in that way, but it's also there's been a lot of great opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me too, I've been working kind of across the country in these little tiny rooms, and with artists that I would not get to work with normally in the same room, but because we can all just get on the interweb, we can be like, I can be working with Jimmy Blay in Montreal and, people all over the place. So that is a benefit of it. Although, so much of like theater is live, performance is live. And I hope that we're taking the opportunity to make new things so that when this is because the other great thing that has happened, the other terrible great thing that has happened, that the pandemic has given us pause to stop and think about what we want to do, but also the like sort of Black Lives Matter, the neo-civil rights movement, and the sudden awareness of inequity in this country that I hope means when we get through this, if we get through this, that there is more room for Indigenous performance.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there was one performance that had was an opera about Louis Riel that was scheduled to be performed in Winnipeg in last October, which of course then had to be canceled. And I'm really hoping that that comes back, right? That, once, we're past COVID, I think there's going to be like a whole rush of things coming out. So that's something to look forward to. All that pent up energy will burst out on stage and on the scene, and yeah. So
it's true. I know you're not supposed to have favorites, especially they're supposed to all be equal. I don't care. For me, one of my favorite parts of the book is the interview with Daniel David Moses, who died last summer. So that's the other thing that I think about is like, and this I think is one of the reasons these books are so important in terms of capturing. Theater is so ephemeral, right? Capturing a moment, capturing the voice of someone. Like, we didn't expect Daniel to die so soon, so young. And so this interview with him in here is such a gift to me, to be able to hear Dan's voice. And it was also one of my favorite moments in performing Turtle Island, like in the conference, was I got to sit down and have a conversation with Daniel publicly. Like, we talked in front of people, which was great. So I know it's not fair to ask, but do you have a favorite part in the book?
Yeah, I mean, I think I have a lot of favorite parts. That exactly, it's hard to pin down one. I was talking about the chapter by Megan Davies.
Yes.
So like I have favorites in different ways, like in terms of a historical and like scholarly favorite. That would be my favorite in that sense, because I just think it just captures that important aspect of how Indigenous theater can actually make political change. It's real, like, and that confirms that it's, if there's ever any doubt, right? So that's really cool. But yeah, as you said, the conversation with Daniel, that is extremely poignant. As you were saying, Daniel David Moses was so important as a playwright and a writer. He was so wonderful as a person, and his loss was so devastating, and just, yeah, like you said, it was very surprising, and so there is something amazing that that conversation that Annie Smith had with him, and that is preserved in a book like this, for sure, and that the book is really special in that way. And he's very open. So I really recommend that chapter to any reader as well, because he's really open and personal about his own process, right? Which is often a rare insight, because it's difficult to talk about one's own process. But he was at such he was so in touch with himself that he just gave an amazing interview there.
Yeah, it was an amazing interview, and it raises questions for me. So, like, he was talking about a piece that he was working on in that interview with Annie, and I'm like, where is that piece? I've never seen that piece. What is that piece called, and how do we find it? Like, those are the, sort of the questions. Of course, no artist is really ever done. Their work goes on. For those of you out there in the internet who haven't been thrown off the way I was so rudely, Daniel David Moses wrote an amazing play. I mean, a million amazing plays, but the one that premiered in Ottawa, actually, Almighty Voice and His Wife, which is kind of, if there were an Indigenous canon, that would be in the canon. It's a fantastic play in two halves about Almighty Voice, the Cree warrior who was killed in the 1800s, but then the second half is in the 1900s, and he's a ghost. It's a fantastic, complicated play that everyone should read, everyone, regardless. But he was also a poet, and Daniel, so there's a bunch of poetry that he has left behind. And one of his poems called Song of the Bear's Breakfast, I send out every March 21st to all my friends because it's about waking up after winter. So Daniel David Moses, that's a good one. We should remember, Jesse, as we're talking, to keep throwing out books and names, of things that people should be looking at, books and plays and Indigenous writers. I also noticed that inside the book, the referencing of other Indigenous writers and things like, I noticed that, I think it was Kehente Horn Miller who referenced Sean Wilson's Research is Ceremony book, which was for me a transformational book, like understanding how to sort of resist the jargon of the academy and still be doing critical work, which is, I think, a thing that for me keeps popping up inside the book, like people talking about in their own words, in their own dialect almost. I'm thinking of Carol Grey Eyes' piece about the bundle, and maybe you could talk a bit about that piece and what it was like putting that piece inside this book.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's another one of my favorite chapters as well, because of the bundle, right? And because she does such an amazing job of, as you said before, like teaching how to teach, right? And that's one of the great values of the book. So for teachers out there who are looking for ways of teaching Indigenous performance, this book is really helpful in that way. Every chapter has some aspect on that, and yeah, like that is one important thing about the book as well, is that it's not overly academic in its jargon. And again, that's because most of the contributors are artists themselves, right? So they're speaking, I think they're speaking the language of artists and educators for the most part, as opposed to like high critical theory, right? And so that was important for us as well, because we wanted it rooted in the community, right? We wanted the book to be something that the wide readership could enjoy. Yeah, and with Carol's piece on the theater bundle, yeah, I mean, it's such an amazing way that she teaches ceremony and protocols through a kind of theater practice. And so when you talk about, well, what's an Indigenous theater practice, she has created, a real Indigenous theater method, and one that I think really connects with most importantly, right, connects with the students and inspires them, right? Yeah. So just for those out there, what Carol's idea is the theater bundle is where, she has students take, important things in their lives and ideas that are, objects that convey their ideas for their vision, and have them together in a bundle, right? And the theater bundle, it's analogous to a medicine bundle, right? Yeah, and then when you unwrap that bundle, you start telling the story behind the different objects in your bundle, and from there emerges the story for one's performance, right? Yeah, so very beautiful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful metaphor, and yet real, also real in a way that metaphor and reality are both the same thing at any given moment. I just before I ask you another question, Jesse, I should remind, because I'm the world's worst host getting thrown out of here. I would have said earlier on that that you guys should be, you there out there in the internet can be posting questions or inside of the Facebook, inside of the chat, and they will be forwarded to us, and I can ask Jesse those questions. So if you have a question, send it along on as a comment on the Facebook, and someone will forward it to us, and we'll get Jesse to answer those. Just in case I get thrown off again, then there's someone else to interview you. The public can interview you. There's a whole bunch of disciplines inside this book. There's, Spy, Denome Welsh talks about opera. Michael Greyeyes talks about film. Armand Ruffo talks about film, but that's a play that he took to a film. Carol talks about a much broader sort of practice. So is that, I'm sure that's not accidental. What does that, can you talk a bit about what that bundle is? I guess the performance bundle for as Indigenous creators. And it's like, it doesn't seem very rigid in a way that, a lot of textbooks that you pick up about theater are like a certain kind of a play.
Yeah, that was one thing. It was very broad in that sense. Like it was more about Indigenous performance, broadly speaking, than just theater, stage theater, right? So performance spanning all the different mediums, like film, music, stage theater, of course, and then also performance storytelling, right? Which is also very popular. That was Standing with Sky Woman by Kente Horn-Miller is about that, right? Performance storytelling. And I think a lot of this is because we wanted to, like, our idea of performance as wide as possible, because that helps us get out of that Western convention or Western notion of theater or performance, right? Because Indigenous cultures have had performance traditions that date back thousands of years, right? As long as there's been a culture, there's performance. And so this was a way for us to, like, by just kind of collapsing all categories, was a way for us to just get out of that that box,
Yeah. I was just in Calgary at Calgary Opera working on a new Indigenous opera with Marion Newman, the mezzo, the Kwa mezzo. She's also Stolo, and Ian Couson, the Métis composer, and Michelle Lafferty, who's Indigenous from the North, and Melody Courage, who's Métis, who lives in Vancouver. Like all of these Indigenous people working together on an opera. And Marion, who Spy talks about Giwaden in here, which was the first time I met Marion. She played Nodenquay in Giwaden, and I was like, wow, we're making an Indigenous opera, and it was news to me. But Marion talks about exactly that you just said. We've always done performance, and she's like, in the Longhouse we use mask, and we use song, and we use dance, and we use story. And really, isn't that opera? Because she is always being challenged as an Indigenous mezzo to, why are you doing that Western form, that Western European form of art? And she's like, this is the way we do art. It's just a bit of a shift, right? So it's great to sort of see how embracing the book is in terms of all of those forms. I've got questions in here that I'm going to start opening up to. Jennifer Decker would like to know if you prefer to work with an all Indigenous crew and actors when presenting Indigenous authored plays. What more does that bring to your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I just prefer to work with a fun group of people. Yeah, I gotta say that. Like, of course, when we start, it's generally in a Indigenous community context, right? So there's always a lot of Indigenous students and professionals involved. So that's never an issue there. But also, like, we're in community in Regina, there's always a lot of non-First Nations or Canadian students or professionals as well in the community. And we've never like tried to be essentialist or anything like that. Like, we just have always been embracing and and have as much fun as possible. And so that means, sometimes we'll have First Nations performers playing white roles, or sometimes whites playing white First Nations roles, and it's never been an issue for us. Now I understand, like, it can be controversial in other contexts, but that's something we've I don't know, we've never had an issue with. Yeah, and in fact have fun with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and for me, it is a way of, it is a way of moving towards reconciliation, right?
Yeah.
Is to have mixed groups, is to be bringing people along. In the book, I'm not plugging my own essay, but in the book, I talk about A Prayer for Rita Joe, because I directed the 40th anniversary Ecstasy of Rita Joe for the National Arts Centre and Western Canada Theatre. And that is a play written by a white man, Ukrainian descent, always been done with, like, the premiere was done with a white woman playing Rita Joe. And it's always been tilted in that way. And when I directed it, we cast, I guess it was a cast of 13 or 11 or something. It was a big cast, and it was almost all Indigenous. So there were 3 white roles: the priest, Todd Duckworth out of Ottawa, Mr. Homer, Pierre Bro out of Ottawa, and Darcy Johnson played the cock, because that was predictable. And those 3 guys were the only white folks in the cast. And then the creative team was almost all Indigenous as well. And what it did was it shifted the power, so that the story that used to be about the oppression of this young woman and her death was tilted on its side a bit, because of the gaze, right? Just because of the vision, the viewpoint of the players. So I think it's interesting. I think we have to do it mindfully every time. We have to be, me too. I just want a room where everybody wants to be in the room. I'm not interested in, I'm interested in play. It's called a play for a reason. Erica Frank says, can you name the author of Song of the Bear's Breakfast, that's Daniel David Moses, who we were talking about, who is both a playwright and a poet. And it's such a great poem. And he was such a great playwright. And I miss him already. And then Stephanie Baudouin says, if anyone has more information, websites, articles on the play influencing the creation of Nunavut, I would be very grateful to be informed. So I wonder if there's a way to direct people to that resource, Jesse.
Yeah. Well, by the book. No.
By the book.
Yeah. Well, no. So that chapter, you can find information in that chapter on the book. So the play was named Changes, and then Megan goes through the production history of it, and then of course there's a works cited or bibliography that can give you some direction on websites and other materials.
Yeah, and because this is a library gig, you can actually just go and borrow the book from the library and do that stuff. Instead of buying.
But it's a good question, and I encourage you to check it out for sure. but yeah, you brought up Prayer for Rita Joe, and that's another one of my favorite chapters.
See, now they're all your favorites.
Yeah, but it's for that precise reason that you're talking about it, because that play is so important historically for Indigenous theater, and it always has that issue though that it was written by a white author, right? And the first major play, Indigenous themed play, has that stereotype, right, of the woman and victim and that of the court system and that, and you take us through the process of restaging that play and revisioning it and all the challenges and difficulties again that you had to face, but then ended up being very successful at bringing that an Indigenous vision of the play to the stage, which I think is so important to our theater history. Yeah.
It does sort of raise the question. Oh, I just looked out the window and the moon is up there. Hi. It does raise the question about, and this is also contained in the book in a number of ways, performing Turtle Island, about like, we are not monolithic, right? Like, we are all different nations, different practices. Reading the Sky Woman piece, and we've all heard all of those legends. And so do you find that we are pulling together as Indigenous theater artists, or is there still like conflict, tension? Like, is the difference too big for us to sort of bridge?
No, I think it's kind of both, right, are always going to be happening. I don't think the differences are too big to bridge. I think that it just depends. There are people coming together, different groups coming together, and then, but there's still, I see conflicts and things coming apart as well in different areas. And so I think that's part of the human nature as well, or the human condition. Like, conflicts arise and groups, move apart. But there is a lot of groups coming together as well. So there's a lot of great work happening. I always go to your notion in your book, Medicine Shows. So there's another book to plug. Yvette Nolan has this wonderful book called Medicine Shows, and the framework is the notion of good medicine and bad medicine. And good medicine is about, simply put, it's about building connections, and bad medicine is that which involves breaking connections, right? And how that's at the heart of performance as well, right? The point of performance is that good medicine, that building connections. And so I always use, that's the guiding principle of, guiding philosophy and principle of my theater work, especially. So I think I've thanked you for that one before, but if I didn't, thank you again.
Thank you. Thanks, Jesse. That was my bundle, right? Like, when I was leaving Native Earth, I knew that I had all of this information in my head, and I knew how ephemeral theater was, and I knew that there was so little critical work and documentation. And so I decided to kind of write down everything that was in my head and put it into that particular bundle, Medicine Shows, for the very reason also it came out of that talking stick circle where people were like, we need more critical work. And I was like, well, I'll put mine here in this and put it out. And then, you put this, you put it down in here and put it out. So we're trying to build up a library of critical work, and specifically Canadian critical work, because there's some American stuff. And although we don't really recognize that border, the medicine line, the Indigenous experience, the American Indian experience, is different from our experience. Do you find that in looking at the work, at like the plays by American Indians versus First Nations or, Inuit or Métis writers up here?
Yeah, definitely. In performance and literature as a whole, right? Like, Indigenous literature in Canada there's a different history and sense going on than Native American literature. There's a lot of connections, of course, and crossover and parallels, of course. And, you know, the border between the US and Canada is, you know, a imaginary colonial border, right? But still the history has shaped things a little differently, and you can see it in the literature and the writers. And yeah, so there is a distinct difference there, and that's why there's so much. You know, and then when you include the United States, it's like things, you know, just quadruple in the amount of material or more. So myself, just out of sheer necessity, I've had to kind of make that conscious decision of like, okay, I got to just focus on, you know, what's going on in Canada, right?
Yeah.
So I've had to kind of limit myself in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. In the comments, Deborah Holmes Bethel says the Royal Winnipeg Ballet told the story of Rita Joe back in, she says 1966. It was actually 1971. And I can tell you why I know that. It is difficult to find Indigenous dancers, but I was so proud that they did this. But the story has to be told, and it was told successfully through movement and dance. And that's part of my story, Deborah, because I was a ballet student at the Royal Winnipeg Ballet when the ballet did The Ecstasy of Rita Joe. And it was the first time, this has become like legend now, it was the first time I saw myself and my mother on stage. And the dancers were actually Ana Maria de Gores, who was Spanish, played Rita Joe, and Salvatore Aiello, who was Italian, played Jamie Paul. And it didn't matter to me. To me, they were Indigenous. They were like what I saw and the story that I saw. That with my mom, who was like Algonquin from KZ, who took me there. And the only reason we could afford tickets was because I was a ballet student there. And it was 1971 and I saw myself on stage. And so it was a hugely important story for me, which is why all those years later, I was able to direct it. So that was my own personal sort of, oh my God, she's talking about my creation story. Catherine Holst says, how challenging is it for Indigenous theater to be performed in traditionally colonial theater spaces?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. I guess we've always just gone for it. Like when you just have the standard stage. But we've also played, like our group here, we've also played with, like we're lucky we have at First Nations University, we have this wonderful atrium, and as a faculty member, I have access to to be able to use that, and so we use that space a lot, and that is definitely more of an Indigenous space. But we've always, when we've taken our play to the University of Regina's theater, the Riddell Center, we've always just jumped at the opportunity and embraced it, because just what's important to us is just getting that performance out. For sure. And then, but yeah, a lot of performances do attempt to subvert that. If I can share my screen for a minute, if that's okay, I can show you some of the performance spaces that I'm talking about. Okay. So I'll share my screen. Hopefully this, oh no, I can't share my screen.
Why?
The screen sharing is disabled.
Maybe the host will let you do that. Oh, you're the co-host now. Try it again.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
It works.
Yeah. So this was at the Performing Turtle Island gathering, and this was a memorial performance. And this is in the Veterans Memorial teepee at First Nations University. And it's the atrium, and this is a star blanket embedded in there. And this is the prayer teepee in the back. And we were able to, for this performance, make use of the prayer teepee as a spiritual space within the performance itself. And so we were able to incorporate ceremony and performance in the context of community. So this is certainly, you know, if you talk about what an Indigenous performance space, this is certainly it. And here's some other pictures from the Performing Turtle Island event. This was a sculpture by a Maori artist from New Zealand. And this, I always love this. This is Amy Malbuff. She's a performance artist, and that's sugar that she's buried in, right? It's so amazing.
Yeah.
Like, and
The
when you think,
perspective is from above, right? She's lying on the floor and we're looking down at her.
yeah, and she's buried in sugar. And of course, sugar has, you know, a very complicated colonial history, right? With the plantation colonies, and then of course the health effects of sugar, the history of diabetes, and all of that kind of thing, right? And so this was an amazing performance as well. She came out of it and she made a bannock afterwards for us. This is Kevin McKenzie doing a performance on, you know, just the spiritual and religious conflicts. And it was another performance art piece. There's other performance art here too. This is Julian Boden-Herney, who is making a large, like weaving a large braid and doing a birth ceremony or a mother's ceremony right out in front of the ceremony teepee. And then this was another performance inside the atrium as well. And you have Laurie Blondeau and Adrian Stimson, who did another performance piece with these berries.
Laurie was just given the GG like yesterday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Laurie's a Governor General Award artist now.
That's wonderful. That's
Isn't
amazing. Yeah. And here she is doing this amazing performance at Performing Turtle Island. And then this was a play by Tara Began and featuring Dakota Hebert called In Spirit, which was really amazing. And there was a wonderful effect. So this was a traditional, okay, so here's an example of a traditional, like a Western theater space. They were in the Shoebox Theater, but they really made great use of it. And this was a play about a girl who went missing, and the lighting design was amazing for this because you have this girl here, and then she moves. There was a projection of her over top of her, and then she moves and steps away. It was very haunting and very effective. So that was a way of using that theater space. And then this was another play, was called The House of Chow Mein, I think. But this was at the Riddell Center. And you see here, this, again, a conventional Western theater stage. But it was extremely effective. One of the scenes was set in New York City. You can see how they conveyed that with the Empire State Building hovering above.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is a woodcut of the Theater de Neptune, 1606, which may have been the first Western theater play that was staged in Canada. But of course, it's not the beginning of the history of theater in Canada, because as we've been talking, Indigenous performance traditions go back thousands of years, right?
And they made Indigenous folks drive their canoes into those pictures that they were making in Theater de Neptune. It's like, okay, now you guys do this.
Yeah, right. And that's why this is fascinating, because the very first Western performance has that stereotype,
Right.
of the indigenous actors as kind of props in the
Right.
margins, right? And as well, I was told, like in the history books, they had white actors playing these native roles, right? So even then, in the very first production, and so that's part of what this book was about as well, is reclaiming that tradition, because of course, those theater traditions, which were robust and strong, of course, were interrupted with residential schools, right?
Yep.
Where, you know, and so then for decades, the only real type of theater was in kind of, you know, Christian and Easter pageants. And this is a photo that a friend of mine let me use. It's at a residential school and it's for an Easter pageant. And you can see the absurd irony here, because of course these residential schools were attempting to assimilate, you know, indigenous children through education, and then here they have them dressed up as the very stereotype of what they're trying to assimilate them from, right? It's kind of it's crazy.
Yeah.
And then you have, of course, then there was, you know, 1967 with the Ecstasy of Rita Joe, and these are some stills from I think these are from your production.
That's
right?
my production. Yeah.
Yeah, right. So that's why this play is so important in that sense. But then you have, you know, where Indigenous theater really starts coming into its own was with, or you know, Thompson Highway, and he has a number of plays, and then Daniel David Moses, as you mentioned. So as this is that play that Yvette was talking earlier, Almighty Voice and His Wife, as well as a whole bunch of other plays. Floyd Favel is amazing. That's another one of my favorite parts of the book as well, is the last chapter is a long narrative poem by Floyd Favel in, you know, in the Performing Turtle Island book, about his own journey as an Indigenous playwright, going through, because he was classically trained in Europe in the Western styles, and then him coming back and finding his Indigenous. Just going to flip through here. There's Daniel there talking. There's Armand Rufo, and there's Yvette.
And there's me.
Yeah. Was that,
we were all there.
Yeah. Wendigo Tail. Yeah. This is Kahente Horn Miller, who was doing her performance of her story of Sky Woman, which is a chapter in the book as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. So and there's a whole bunch of people there too. There's Kahente and there's
Carol.
Yeah.
Everybody hanging out. Oh, that was a good time. We had a good time. And and you made a book out of it, which is also great. I have a couple more questions in the chat. One of them, are there any plays you feel are a must read for folks who want to dive deeper into the history of Indigenous theater, or work from young creators that excites you about the future of Indigenous storytelling? I would say there's two anthologies that were co-edited by Rick Knowles and Monique Mojica called Staging Coyote's Dream. And that there's 2 volumes. There's like, I think 14 plays in the 2 volumes. And it's a good sort of introduction, because you can read all kinds of different kinds of plays by Indigenous theater artists, but they're quite old now. Like, not the artists, but the books. Like, they were the first ones out, I think, in terms of an anthology. So they're called Staging Coyote's Dream, and it's Playwrights Canada Press.
Yeah, sorry, I think we lost Yvette there. Yeah, Staging Coyote's Dream. Absolutely, that's a great place to start. And then, as Yvette mentioned earlier, I mean, Almighty Voice and His Wife by Daniel David Moses, The Rez Sisters by Thompson Highway. If you're looking for comedy, you have Drew Hayden Taylor, who's very prolific. And one of the most amazing plays is by Monique Mojica, called Princess Pocahontas and the Blue Spots, which I just think is an amazing work of genius, right? It's so so amazing. So but Staging Coyote's Dream, if you just want a good starting place for sure.
Yeah, it is a good starting place. I'm back. I came back.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm just, beaming in and out on the
Yeah.
Star Trek Enterprise. So if I go again, thanks, Jesse. It was fun. There's Jamie Moore says, is there a website or somewhere to refer to for a list of Indigenous plays? I think a digital collection would be so cool. I'd sign up. I will point out there is a list. A couple of years ago, maybe 8-9 years ago, there was a summit at Banff Center of Indigenous Creators, and they created a list that is a living document, an ongoing list, and it is currently housed on Ad Hoc Assembly's website. There's a body of work list there, and it lists every Indigenous play that we could think of at that time and all the Indigenous authors. So it's a kind of a great place to go to look at people's names, but then you have to do your own Google work of like, where are these plays and are they in the libraries or are they in, Staging Coyote's Dream? Some of them are. So that would be my first go-to place is Ad Hoc Assembly, and go to their resources, and you'll see there is also one for BIPOC, like for Black, Asian, other 2 lists of like by people of color, including the Indigenous list. So that's one place. And Jesse.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that one. I mean, I remember the Banff that conference, but that's really cool that they have that website. I'm gonna have to check it out.
Now you're gonna have to check it out. That's right. I'm trying to think of where else there is. I taught Indigenous drama back in the early 90s, and it was such a skinny little list. And now it's such a massive list, which is kind of great. But it does take a little detective work to sort of track who you want to look at. Young artists, I think of Cliff Cardinal, who is
Tara Began.
Tara Began, Phelan Johnson, who some of you would know from Secret Life of Canada.
Kevin Loring,
Jimmy Blay out of Montreal, who just wrote a play called Wardo. If you go to the Native Earth Performing Arts site, there's often lots of stuff happening there in terms of young artists. And Wissahickon Festival is their new development festival, and so when that happens, you can go and watch like all of the young artists and see who's going to be the up and comers.
And then just keep an eye out in your own communities, in the events section of local publications, because there's so much that happens. It kind of happens on as it goes. And so it's not like there's, some marketing campaign, right? When a group is putting together a production, it just kind of happens. And it might be, advertised, a week or 2 ahead of time, right? At your local theater company. And so, just keep an eye open.
Yeah. And for those of you in Ottawa, you of course have the National Arts Centre Indigenous Theatre there. You can ask them about their resources, their library, who they're working with. Theater is all about relationships. And so don't be afraid to talk to the theaters. We're supposed to be in relationship with our communities. Jamie asked if there is a place to watch them online, and no, there's not, because of intellectual property rules, actors organizations rules. It's really hard to see those things they're not archived anywhere that we can show them. So as Jesse says, you got to watch for those when those things happen. Get yourself on some lists like Native Earth Performing Arts, Indigenous Performing Arts, and then you start to see what's happening and you can start watching people.
Yeah. And then, sometimes there's some, like, if you go to YouTube and say, search like Indigenous performance art or something like that, a lot of different things will come up. And there's a lot, you can go down the rabbit hole.
You
on-
can.
with some of that as well.
Down the indigenous rabbit hole. But you can also, if you find the names and start reading, you can go to the interweb and ask them for Daryl Dennis or Daniel David Moses and see what
Yeah.
pops up, and at least start to get a look at things. Jesse, since I haven't been thrown out of the internet again, I'm going to take this opportunity to wrap us up.
Okay.
And thank you so much for, not only this conversation, but hosting yourself when I left the room. Anything else you wanted to just wrap with before we say thank you and so long?
Well, no, I just want to thank you again. It's wonderful to see you. I know you mentioned at the beginning that where we first met when I was doing that, working with the Indigenous students, and we did the unplugging, where it was called Two Old Women at the time still.
That's right.
Yeah, and so that was amazing. And that has always been inspiring, right? And the students who were part of that are still going strong. Yeah. And again, just I want to thank the National Arts Center and the Ottawa Public Library. This has certainly been an honor. Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you all. Thank you out there in the internet for watching, for joining us. Go to your library and look for some books. Thanks, Jesse. Miigwech.
Miigwech.
Miigwech. Miigwech. See you all, people.